the reason why we wanted to have you on today is I think, as lots of people are probably aware, there was some very interesting New York Times polling that came out recently that basically showed that Democrats now have a bigger advantage among white college graduates than they do among non-white voters of all educational levels. And this polling also pointed out that there are some pretty stark class divides on what issues voters say are most important to them. So I wanted to dive into that with you. But first, I want to read a line sort of summarizing this research from Axios, because I thought this was pretty provocative. So recently, Axios wrote, Democrats are becoming the party of upscale voters concerned more about issues like gun control and abortion rights. Republicans are quietly building a multiracial coalition of working class voters with inflation as an accelerant. All right, so I should mention, for those who don't know, your research interests, of course, concern this ongoing problem of class de-alignment, and also, the Center for Working Class Politics, which we've covered on this show before, also explores that problem. So what do you make of this new polling and, the Axios assessment of the Democratic Party? And what do you think all of this suggests about the trajectory that the Democratic Party is on right now?
Yeah, so I think that you said it well, exactly what the Times reported and what I think the sort of liberal and democratic establishment, which a lot of people I think are looking to this poll and thinking about the midterm elections coming up and what that's going to mean for Democrats. Certainly, it's looking at this one moment in time when I think concerns about the reversal of Roe and concerns about elections given the January 6th Commission. Those are sort of on the minds of the likely Democratic voters. And really what I think the poll showed and what pundits and pollsters have been latching onto is basically a flip in what you saw in a Democratic coalition in something like the 2016 congressional elections, where you had lots of support, majority support, and a really huge margin for Democrats among non-white voters, and also less support among college-educated whites. And this, they found basically the reverse. Now, Democrats have a pretty large margin among these college-educated whites and are losing ground among non-white voters, and in particular, I think Hispanic voters. I think it's important, one of the things I think this poll is looking to, and one of the, I think, you mentioned our work at the Center for Working Class Politics. One of the things, the sort of misnomers or incorrect assessments is the demography as destiny idea that Democrats just kind of continue to have to exist and they're going to gain support from non-white voters just because of who they are. So I think in some ways this poll shows that that's really not the case. But I also think that one thing that didn't get highlighted as much is that not only is this, I think this class de-alignment and the shift among working class and using sort of education, as imperfect as it is as a measure for class, and we can, I'm sure, talk about that more, this really flip in support. So the Democratic Party is looking less like the FDR coalition of the New Deal and working class support. Those voters we see increasingly moving over to the Republican Party, which I think really does say some stuff about the upcoming midterm elections. But this is also, one of the things that we have talked about at the center and are conscious of in our work is that this is a much longer trend than just this year or, failure to pass any Build Back Better sort of to bring people back in. This is a much longer trend.
I want to get your thoughts on the extent to which you see cultural issues driving or playing a role in this de-alignment, right? Because I think that has sort of emerged as like the most tantalizing narrative to a lot of people, even people in the mainstream who, are worried about this class de-alignment and want to do something about it. I think a lot of the leading commentators sort of point to, what they see as cultural issues that they see the Democrats tacking to the left on. Now, obviously, the Center for Working Class Politics has something to say about, the cultural stuff as well. But just as a broad question, is it the cultural issues that are driving this de-alignment, either long-term or short-term?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a piece of it, but also, one of the things that in looking back at the data, looking back at this survey for today, they also referenced I think it was particularly looking at Hispanic voters who they also asked about issue priorities, and they broke it down exactly like you are, which I think is, people trying to figure out what's at the root of this de-alignment or this shift. So thinking about the cultural issues, the ones they looked at were abortion, gun control, and also threats to democracy, which again, I think is pointing towards January 6th and the ongoing investigation. And then the economy, which is one of my favorite questions that we ask, and actually something we're going to that will be forthcoming in some of our work with Center for Working Class Politics. It's not always clear to me what it means when people say they care about the economy. I think globally we understand. I'm concerned about what's in my pocketbook, but one of the things we're actually trying to look into further, and this I think could have some bearing on how working class candidates try to build support, or how Democratic candidates try to build support among these groups where Democrats are slipping, is what kind of policies does that entail? Is that, certainly they ask about concern over inflation, but is that, supportive of raising a minimum wage? Is that corporate tax rates? Sort of what does that mean? So I think that's one way of sort of unpacking and think about it.
I am curious also, like, it seems, every so often we have polling, like the New York Times polling that comes out, and then there's kind of like a flurry of attention around this ongoing problem of the Democrats losing their working class base. And then there's like another flurry of op-eds, usually from just other mainstream Democratic strategists and commentators who like offer some solutions of how to deal with it. But overall, and I think that this is something that you've talked about before, there seem to be like very few signs that the party is interested in seriously addressing this problem of class de-alignment. I feel like every couple of weeks, Bernie Sanders writes an op-ed begging the Democratic Party to like pay attention to bread and butter issues and to get back on track. But other than that, I don't know. Again, it like seems very like flash in the pan, I guess, that the Democratic Party would actually start paying attention. But the larger question for you is like, even beyond kind of this lack of political will, is there anything that the Democrats can do at this point to sort of reverse this process? I just ask because the latest polling just seems so dire. Like, I wonder if you think that class de-alignment is like a runaway train at this point.
I sort of wish I had a more optimistic answer. I think I'm a little bit on your side here. It's pretty bleak. And I think the other part of it is, the takeaway that really stood out is this, declining support and the sort of proof against the demographics as destiny thesis, which Democrats have been, trumpeting for a long time. But I think in some ways, like, I wonder what headlines you were looking at, and maybe that's where we're sitting. I'm sitting in Washington, D.C. right now, and have been, working on the Hill for this year and sort of getting up close there. But the working class, decline and slip has not been, I think, what the main narrative about this kind of shift has been. So I guess there was maybe some more recognition. And certainly I think they know. I think Democrats and these strategists and campaign operatives, they know that this is what's happening, but it's not the main narrative that they're talking about. In terms of I think we have to keep trying. And that's, I think the little piece of what we're trying to do with Center for Working Class Politics is try to, if you could get some candidates to run a different way, and to try to focus more on these bread and butter issues. I think the other problem is that they just don't have anything to run on. I think the infrastructure bill was one thing, but part of the, in my opinion, sort of flawed approach as well, we can maybe capitalize on anger over abortion, anger, and people being riled up about, the January 6th hearings, and concerned about really, I think, catastrophic gun violence. But I don't know that that's going to carry them all the way through November. And especially if you look at this poll and just the absolutely overwhelming indication that people are really concerned about the economy, and issues like inflation are also really present. So that's not very optimistic. I think it's a pretty, and again, I would point to this isn't new. That's the other part of this, is that this has been decades that this shift has been taking place. And, you mentioned I look a lot in my research at the kind of coalition and policies that were championed in the 1930s and 40s on the New Deal. Our policy landscape doesn't look like that. And,
Right.
Part of that, they say, well, we don't have the support and we can't get Manchin on board. But part of it, I think that there's not a commitment that's the kind of direction the party should head in.
So obviously, I feel like I have to say that we on the left, or even just like progressives in general, there's not a lot that we can do at this point to shift the trajectory or the kind of policy platform of the Democratic Party. However, there's we can always do a little bit of something, right? And so I guess the final question for you is: do you feel like this new polling changes how we should think about progressive and or left messaging? Because that's kind of like the other piece of your research with Center for Working Class Politics. And maybe another way of asking the question is do you feel like this new polling indicates that the Democratic brand has turned sort of irredeemably toxic among working class voters? Because something that I want to bring up about the last Center for Working Class Politics study is that you guys found that Democratic and Democratic leaning primary voters aren't actually all that turned off by just the idea of Democrats. But are things heading in that direction?
No, actually, I was exactly thinking of that. I'm glad that you brought that up. That really was something that we were a little surprised to find, that even among some independents, the Democratic label wasn't as harmful as we might have expected it to be. That wasn't necessarily a turnoff to voters. But it also it reminded me of something I wanted to say in response to your question about the difference between the sort of the cultural and the bread and butter issues. I thought one of the other interesting pieces of the poll was pointing to, I think it was Hispanic voters who prioritized the economy as their primary issue, but also were supportive of abortion rights. And so I don't think that the message is you can't embrace some of these, the cultural issues. I think,
Right.
What's happening right now with the votes on the resolution around same-sex marriage in Congress and Republicans, I think, especially those who are in highly contested elections, are sort of are swinging more in support of that. I think that's kind of an indication that certainly things can change. And I'll say again, one of the things we found in the first survey that we did was having racial justice on a platform and civil rights wasn't similarly to the Democratic label, was actually not at all hurting the candidate profiles that we were sort of testing and looking at in this somewhat strange vacuum of survey and experimental research.
Right.
So yeah, I think that there are, and that's one of the things we want to look at moving forward is that kind of sort of the difference between those types of support.
So if the Center for Working Class Politics was able to advise all the Democratic candidates who were running in the midterms this year, what would you tell them? How should they? Obviously, as we've said many times on this show, messaging isn't everything, but it is sort of the one piece that politicians and political campaigns can control. Given everything that's going on now and this new polling that we have, what should Democratic candidates be doing?
Well, I think one thing to think about, I know you had Samir Santi on a couple weeks ago to talk about inflation, is provide a different answer to what the right is saying on some of these economic, these really serious issues. Explain inflation in a way that's not, well, Biden pumped billions of dollars of aid. Let's try to sort of combat that and provide a different explanation for the economic situation, which then can lend itself to support for, I think, policies that are going to ultimately, benefit working people much more than what the right's offering. So yeah, I think that's one example. And not shying away from. I mean, I also think keep an eye on. I think that Roe and January 6th are really, sort of hot in the media right now. We don't know what that landscape's going to look like in a couple of months.
Yeah.
So not forgetting, I think that's the economy is really important to people. And so let's keep that really a part of the narrative as well. The problem is they don't have too much to speak to on that, which is the real challenge. But ultimately, what they stand for is still better than what the right is offering.
Yeah. All right, Katie Rader, again, thank you so much. It was great to see you.
Great to see you too. Thanks so much.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.